Hey everybody, welcome to Inside Quest. Our goal is to take you inside the minds of the world's most effective thinkers so that you can learn with ease what they have learned with great difficulty. And if you pay attention, I promise you, our guests will help you acquire the behaviors and thought patterns that you're going to need to be successful no matter what it is that you're trying to accomplish. All right, the man joining us today is a best-selling author and leadership expert who has had a big impact on Quest, even though we actually just met for the first time just a couple minutes ago. But he was introduced to me by an Inside Quest superfan, the guy who created QuakeBooks.net, Mr. Kai Whiting. Kai, I am eternally grateful to you for introducing me to today's guest. And anybody that hasn't seen his website, go check it out. It's absolutely amazing. All right, today's guest's book, Under New Management, was filled with an onslaught of usable insights that will give anyone who's willing to listen a radically new perspective on the classic problems that trip everybody up in today's working environment. And since perspective to me is everything, I wanted to bring him on the show because honestly, if you're a person or even an organization with a growth mindset, this guy is the visionary who's going to help you evolve. And that evolution to me is what it's all about. He's an associate professor at Oral Roberts University and has a black belt in taking really pretty complex and counterintuitive ideas on leadership, innovation, and strategy and making them super accessible and immediately applicable by anyone. And hey, just to keep things interesting, he's also a decorated Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner and apparently is as comfortable grappling with people on the mat as he is grappling with big ideas. And this unique ability to synthesize big ideas from a really diverse set of disciplines has made him a much sought after thought leader who contributes regularly to such prestigious media outlets as Forbes, Harvard Business Review, and Psychology Today. He's also an in-demand speaker who's keynoted for some of the world's largest and most esteemed companies and conferences, including Microsoft, South by Southwest, and TEDx. Please, guys, help me in welcoming the best-selling author of The Myths of Creativity and Under New Management, the host of the prodigious podcast Radio Free Leader, the doctor who never asks you to call him doctor, David Burkus. Welcome to the show.
Yeah. So you even caught the people don't call me doctor thing, huh?
Yeah, you know what? And I have to ask. So going through everything, I was like, hey, if I put all the time in becoming a doctor, it's...
So my wife is an ER doctor. Oh. So she actually like heals people, right? And all I do is torture undergraduates. So it just feels weird to be called doctor. So people call on the phone, doctor, but that's totally my wife. The weirdest thing is I get recruiting calls from other hospitals.
Really?
Like, Dr. Burkus, would you like to? I'm like, yeah, you want my wife and she doesn't want you. So
that's pretty funny. Yeah. All right, let's start with something weird.
Okay.
What have you learned about life and business through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu?
So I don't remember who said it to me, but at some point in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu seminar, we had a really like a knowledge bomb, like type thing. And it was when he said, we're explaining a technique, and I said, oh, that's the wrong way. And he goes, there's no wrong way. There's just the easy way and then lots of harder ways, right?
That's actually really interesting. And do you know Firas Zahabi by any chance?
Yes. Oh, yeah. George St. Pierre. See?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
He really is an incredible guy. And uses martial arts maybe more than specifically Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but really is, in my opinion, the modern day Bruce Lee, and shows like all of those interesting connections, and I think there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts. So the first is mindfulness is a big trend right now, and the exercise of martial arts. Like when someone's trying to choke you unconscious, you have to be in the moment. You have to be mindful, right? So there's the benefits of meditation there, but I think a lot of it is just no matter what your athleticism, we get people into the gym that are former athletes of all spectrums, and they get in terms of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they suck. And I think that's for any martial art, is you starting again, like having to take the white belt mindset and realize you're going to be terrible about this, gives you kind of a sense of things are worth working for, things are worth fighting for, and you get better over time. And I think there's probably a lot. I mean, to my knowledge, Angela Duckworth's never done a grit study on martial arts, but I think there's a lot to be said for that.
Wow, that's a great point.
Yeah, I think it grows that grit idea, and then again, it grows that idea of it's okay to be awful at this, because if you just keep practicing, you'll get better. I mean, I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 10 years. I've been doing judo
Wow.
for 11 years, and I'm still terrible at a lot of stuff. But it's that idea that there's the right way, the perfect way, and then there's lots of harder ways, and you just keep working through all of those. I think that pertains to life too. I mean, I know you are a big fan of Carol Dweck's work and growth mindset, and I think you cannot have a fixed mindset in any martial art, because then you'd never learn. The fact that you did learn proves that the growth mindset is the better one.
I love that. And martial arts to me is something that I have not studied as a discipline, but business to me is very much that exact thing. And I've said to people before, like, may you one day have your house on the line when it tied to your business, right? Because one of the good and the bad thing about when you're an employee versus an owner is being an employee is like renting, right? So if something's going wrong, it's not your problem to fix. You tell the landlord, in this case the business owner, hey, go sort that out. And that's exactly what their job is. And then when you own, it's like, hey, buddy, get to work. You have to fix it yourself. Yeah. And going back to what you were saying about when someone's trying to choke you out, like all of a sudden, hey right
I'm
here,
an owner. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what it's like in business, right? If everything goes under, it takes your life down with it, right? So you're so tied to it that you have to have a growth mindset. And it's this really cool and immediate wake up that, whoa, if this isn't successful, then everything that I have invested in it goes away. And the reason that I say I wish for people that they would have that at some point is that clarity is so powerful. It immediately forces you into a growth mindset, because fighting for an idea that doesn't work is super detrimental. Like if you're sitting there getting choked out and you can feel yourself fading, but you're going, this should work. Well,
it doesn't.
If it doesn't, you're gonna pass out.
Well, I think the other thing too is it teaches you just how much you can lose, right? If you're staring at the ceiling because someone just choked you unconscious, you're still alive. And I think the same thing in business, right? Like even to the level of bankruptcy, you're still alive. As long as you have breath, right, you still have a second chance, right? So as long as the beauty of jiu-jitsu is you can you train hard, you go in, you roll with somebody, you fight with somebody, you get tapped out, which is sort of like your arm was about to break and you saved it, you're still okay. You can go do that next match, right? And I think it's the same thing in business. You're definitely in it, but at the same time, you realize just how much you can lose and still be in that ultimate pursuit of what you're going for, right? It's sort of like, I'm reminded of like Elon Musk, who talks about, I'm going out of business, I'm always wrong, but as long as I'm getting less wrong, then we'll get there eventually. And as long as, he doesn't lose his house and his life, really actually, even if he loses his house, as long as he doesn't lose his life, we as humans still have his brain to benefit from. And I think like you get that. So,
yeah, I want to go back to what you're saying about that white belt mentality, which I think is incredibly, incredibly important. What do you think stops people from having that in business? Or let's, not necessarily just in business. When I say that, I mean the whole strata, right? Whether it's your first day on the job or whether you own the company. What do you think it is that stops people from having a white belt mentality?
I think there is, especially from the business owner, from employee to owner type thing, I think there's a lot of pride that comes from fixed mindset. I've heard in some studies they refer to fixed mindset as a performance proof mindset. In other words, every venture you're trying to prove your competency.
Right.
Whereas if you have a growth mindset, like you're trying to win, but you're also trying to learn, so you don't have to feel that need to prove anything. And I think there's twofolds to that. I think there's one is this idea that what's going to be learned from my success? Well, maybe all I'll do is prove my competence. What's going to be learned from my failure? Well, suddenly I have to deal with that kind of cognitive dissonance of feeling I'm great at something, but having clear proof that I'm not.
Right.
So I think that holds a lot of people up, that idea of fixed mindset or performance proof. They don't want to feel that. Yeah. And honestly, I see that keeps a lot of people off the mats. So in jiu-jitsu, just to give you, so we have white belt, blue belt, blue belt, purple belt, brown belt, black belt. And at blue belt level, like everything. The techniques, etc., but you're still terrible, right? But that's where the big ego wrestle is, because now you've got the fundamentals down, and it becomes really, it's easy and tempting to just want to go roll with white belts who don't know anything and prove how great you are. But you don't learn by doing that. You learn by going with the purple belts and the brown belts.
You just gave me the chills, man. So that go a little deeper on that. So how do people? How can they systematically put themselves in that position where they're able to challenge themselves to grow and really push to the level of black belt? Like how? Because in martial arts, it's easy, man. You win or you lose, right? And so I'm either doing the right things or I'm not. But in life, it's so much more vague.
Well, but what's weird is, in my experience at least, it's been the exact same. So the weird dynamic, we're on the mats and there's a spectrum of people of all different belts. And most of the time when you lose, and you lose to a higher belt, they're also there to explain to you what you did wrong, to show you what you should actually do, to help sort of teach and coach and correct you. I feel like a lot of times in business and in life, we don't feel like those people are there, but they are. I owe my success as an author and a speaker to being able to email or call people who are far further ahead down the same road I'm traveling. And the weirdest thing I've ever found is none of them think they're a competitor. And I'm sure it's the same way with you in business. There are even people in the nutrition industry who are friends with you.
Sure.
Right? Even though, if I'm at a store, I'm staring at your product and their product, but you two don't feel that. You're friendly competitors, and it makes both of you better. And I think that's the same thing here. What you have to get over is that realization that losing is not the end, because on the other end of losing, there is somebody who's more experienced that you just lost to, who's willing to actually take the time and invest and explain to you what's going on.
Wow, how do you institutionalize that? So, and I will give you some insight from this side of the table, what it's like to read your books. Very challenging, right? Because you intentionally take a new stance, a radical stance, which is it is super effective at forcing the people who are reading it, if they're willing, to reevaluate their perspective. And that's why I said in the intro, perspective is everything, right? So. Once you're willing to learn, that's your whole new perspective. You no longer fixed mindset, you've got a growth mindset, it's a whole different world. So you're challenging people who have that mindset to really rethink their most fundamental basic assumptions. And you talk very eloquently about basic assumptions. But when you're looking at it and you're thinking, okay, at some point, some of this stuff, I'm super excited to do. And then there's just an element of weeds, right? Of application that gets tough. So what I want to know, because I think that is so powerful, the mentoring that you just talked about, incredible. Let's reduce it to the world of within anyone's company. Let's not take it from my perspective. Let's take it from an employee perspective. How do you, from the employee perspective, make sure that it becomes institutionalized, that you get the mentorship when you fail, maybe versus lose, because hopefully in the company it's not adversarial. But how do you institutionalize that? How do you make that for sure it's going to happen?
So when you say institutionalize, you scare me a bit, because how many of you have ever been in a so-and-so is my mentor, officially assigned person who's going to help you on board, etc. Okay, and everyone who's nodding their head, keep nodding your head if it was disappointing. Exactly, right? So a lot of times when we institutionalize and formalize stuff, this is one of the reasons I don't ever want to lay out a model of here's step 1, step 2, step 3, because as soon as you do that, I think you drive some of the passion away, but also to some extent you have to wrestle with the principle and then figure out how to apply it. Right, and what you need to do, what you can institutionalize or create a culture of, is kind of a very help-centric culture.
Right.
And it's something that I talk about in both my books. This idea of treating your organization less like a hierarchy with lines and boxes and silos and all that sort of stuff, and treating it like a network where you know who the right person to pair with on what team is. They pair for that project and then they disband. So in terms of institutionalize, I say start with trying to institutionalize just that feeling of help. That feeling that you can help. And it's the same, not to go back to my other love, but it's the same thing with jiu-jitsu. There's a culture of we're all in this to help each other train. Right. And the better they get, the better you get. So it's less a formal policy. That's one thing. It's less a formal policy and procedure and more about having a culture that institutionalizes that help.
All right, so taking the perspective of I'm in a company, let's say it's a team environment where you're project-based, you're built around teams, which I think is pretty interesting. You've talked at length about that. That group is going to intentionally or unintentionally come up with group norms. What are some group norms that you have seen really empower teams?
One of the first norms you have to start with is what is okay communication-wise and what is not okay. And when I say okay, not okay, I don't just mean sort of words and phrases and the level of sarcasm or not sarcasm they use, but I even mean as rudimentary as when is it okay to call people, what are we talking about via text, etc. I see this in my day job as a professor, right? The first thing that teams do is they trade each other's phone numbers, but some teams actually go, well, let's not even bother with that, let's just set up a WhatsApp or let's just set up this. So having that as far as what's appropriate to communicate with me on. I mean, we see this a lot of times in companies now that are struggling to figure out what to do with open office and what are the rules for when can you disturb me, when can you not disturb me? Because I think one of the biggest things, and the reason communication is so important, is if I come to you through a communication channel that feels much more interruptive, I'm already now working uphill getting you to help me. Right? In terms of coming to you through the kind of that medium that you or we as a team decided would be the best one, whichever one it is.
Right. So using teams and creating the norms, I know that there's a lot of definitions and things that go into that. Talk a little bit about how leadership shifts around in those groups. How is a leader defined? In fact, let me back up. I'm going to ask a more basic question. Like, what does it mean to be an employee in today's world? That's my real question.
So legally, we have a couple different types of employees, right? We've got like the full-time employee, we've got part-time, we've got independent contractor / freelancer, whatever. The challenge is that's right now is seen as you're in one of these boxes. And the truth is, I mean, we can look around this room. If you see them as a continuum, suddenly you start to go, well, wait a minute, I'm more halfway between freelancer and full-time employee. And so I think now this is a huge legal problem, right? Because it's going to take a while for us to catch up with definitions and that sort of thing. In terms of employee, I don't like to think in that term. I like to think as far as who's on our team, who's inside the organization versus outside. And anyone who has an individual interest that aligns with the organizational goal, I think counts as that. The level of the intimacy they have with the organization is where they slide on that spectrum in terms of how involved, what percentage of their week or their day are they giving it to that. But again, it's a much better looked at as a continuum. And I think as an organization, we just have to decide who are the people who are working with us because their individual goals are aligned with ours.
And what would you say, so what then makes a good employee? And not from an ownership perspective, from their perspective, like how should they be thinking of it? So if you've read Godin's book Linchpin, like he makes a very compelling case for what he thinks a good employee is and what that should look like.
Yeah, so that's a really weird tension because from a leadership standpoint, organizationally, you kind of don't want linchpins. And I don't mean this in a mean way, like if they disappeared suddenly and decided to go work for a competitor, but like stuff happens, life happens.
Sure.
Bad things happen to people, and as an organization, you need to be able to survive that and have the vulnerability of that. So in my mind, kind of the best linchpin people, the biggest assets are the people who are helping, who are interacting, whose efforts are spread across multiple different teams in helping. Because one, they're now having a bigger impact on those broader teams, but two, should something happen to them, should they decide to leave, or should some sort of tragedy happen to them, it's kind of easier to bounce back because we didn't lose that kind of position. See, I think to go back to this idea of employees, if you're thinking about the building blocks of an organization is the project, and every project you ask who are the right people for that. But that takes a mindset shift of what are we building an organization on. Yes, an organization is built of people, but our unit of design, our fundamental building block probably needs to shift to be the project. So we have to ask what are the projects we're working on in the next 18 months, and then we build and design from there.
So I'll give you how I look at it. It'd be really interesting to hear what you think about this. So somewhat tying back into what you're saying with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the way that I view the world is that the very meaning of life is to acquire as many skills as you can that have utility and then put that utility to the test. Now what's hiding in that definition is that it needs to be in service of something.
Right.
One of the things it could be in service in is a business. It could be in service of bringing water to Africa. I mean, a million things that it could be in service in, being a great parent, whatever the case may be. But one of those is the thing that you're going to pay the bills with. One of the things I really struggle with is I don't want to be parasitic on an employee, right? So if an employee comes in, and even if they only give me 20% of their time, like in 80% of the time, they're totally disengaged, they're checking their email, they're Facebooking with friends, whatever, I'm still, in essence, getting 20% of their time. It's massive. So I want that to be 20% that's beneficial to them. And obviously I'd love to be in a position where 100% of their time that's here is engaged, but then it needs to be beneficial to them. So looking at fulfillment as a metric of one's job. So when I think about what does it mean to be an employee in today's age, where I actually believe large, I mean, look, read Underneath Management. You talk about this. You talk about this in Creativity Myths as well. But breaking down the notion of we don't live in the assembly lines, manual labor world anymore. This is a world of knowledge. And in a world of knowledge, there's a certain level of autonomy and trust that can and probably should be built in for fulfillment, right? You're not going to be fulfilled as a person. So when I'm interviewing, I'm literally asking the question, can you be fulfilled in this role emotionally? Because otherwise, I'm going to be chasing somebody who will be fulfilled because they will forever be transient until they can get something in that moment. So for me, it's that skills, right? Skills acquisition. You're applying it to somehow, some way you find it meaningful to acquire skills that make sense in this business. You want to apply them to this business. That you're seeking fulfillment, and that as a part of seeking fulfillment in that organization, you need certain key building blocks, one of which is trust.
Right.
Does that all make sense?
Yeah. So you have to ask yourself, what are you passionate about? Right, and that could be bringing water to Africa. That could just be improving the lives and health of people. Whatever it is, what are you passionate about? What could you be the best in the world in? Not what are you the best in the world in? Because especially, I'm dealing with undergrads, 20 years old. You're not good at anything except maybe using a smartphone, right? Nothing else are you good at. So what are you passionate about? What could you be the best in the world at if you put in the time? And then what will people pay you to do? Right? And if you think of those three questions as circles, it's where all three of those circles overlap. If what's in that overlap aligns with Quest, then I'll make a good employee here. But the key on that is a real, honest answer to all of those things.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful to me. I'm so phobic of the word powerful now because there is an Inside Quest group out there who take a shot every time I say powerful or something else, and I'm worried they'll die of alcohol poisoning. But that actually is incredibly powerful to me. And going further into what are the other things that people can be doing, the one that I keep coming back to is building trust. Because here's the flip side to the coin of what you paint for somebody on my side of the equation is, hey, don't build hierarchies. It's not about managers. It's really about creating these deaf teams that are around projects. They come together, they go apart, they come back in a new configuration, the 2.6 idea, right? Like all of that stuff. The flip side to that is, how do you bake all of this into the culture so that those things actually happen, right?
Right.
So how it empowers them, right? Rightfully so. I think that's great. And it really becomes this way more two-way interactive, like, hey, let me reveal myself to you. And how, like, part of the reason I do the show is so people can, you're literally hearing me in real time trying to shape this company, right? Like in real time. I read your book, and the thing that we took, just straight stole from your book, was the idea of unlimited vacation.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm reading it and I'm like, trust. Wow, like I grew up in an era where you earned vacation days, right? And right before I read your book, we had been conceptualizing this notion of, as you rank up, and we were doing a belt system, the whole nine. As you rank up, like you got more vacation time, like, whoa, like how cool that would be. And then reading your book, I was like, oh man, but people just don't feel trusted. They feel small, they feel like a child, whatever. Like, that's the last thing that's good for me or for them, right? So finding ways that we could give that to them. And so cool, literally it couldn't have been more than 60 days after reading your book, we had an unlimited vacation policy. So, and then, sort of
well, you're all welcome.
Right? Exactly.
So, I mean, trust is an interesting concept. So trust isn't given and trust isn't earned. Trust is reciprocated. And this is...
Wow, that's weird. Say that again.
So trust isn't given and trust isn't earned. Mm-hmm. Trust is reciprocated.
Okay.
In other words, I have to take a leap of faith and allow you to operate without my guidance, so you can then act trustworthy. Like, you have to feel that I've put my trust in you. It's the same thing with employees. I mean, this is the secret of unlimited vacation, right? In traditional vacation policy versus unlimited vacation, on average, people take about the same amount of days every year. Right? It gets a little bit wider, so the dangerous part is that some people take less vacation. The good part is that some people are taking more, but on average it's about the same. So why in the world would you bother with such a policy? Well, what happened in almost every case with the companies that implemented it, they sensed that this was something that was standing in the way of their employees feeling trusted. So they had to take that leap of faith, right? And this is the same thing in any human relationship, right? You can't have a healthy dating relationship or healthy marriage, et cetera, without at some point being willing to be crushed, in other words, because you are You are trusting them. You're stepping out in that, and then it's reciprocated. Then you do it again, and it's reciprocated again. You do it again, and so it's that upward spiral of reciprocation that is what trust. And we know this on like the molecular level too. Paul Zak is the researcher that really studies this. Can I get super nerdy for a second and explain a study? So, fascinating study. Zach basically played what used to be called the investment game in economics, right? And the way it works is, so there's a researcher over here, and he gives me $10, and he says, you can give as much money as you want from this $10 to Tom, right? And then there'll be a round where Tom can give some amount of money back. How much money do you want to give? So rationally, economically, I know what you're all thinking. I'm just going to take the $10 and leave, right? Because if I give him any money, I have absolutely no guarantees whatsoever that he will give any money back to me, right? It's lost. And this is a gross oversimplification of the study. But that's the idea. Is I have no reason to trust him. I should just take the money and run. This might even be where take the money and run came from, right? But it turns out that when we do tests, the more oxytocin that's going on in your bloodstream, the more likely I am to give money to you. And then when I check before and after you've received the money, your oxytocin level goes up. The higher it goes up, the more you're going to give back to me. Right. In other words, we can see at the molecular level, right, in the actual biochemistry of humans, what's going on with this trust thing. It's reciprocated. When you feel trusted, you are more likely to respond with trustworthy behavior. I think what's most telling to talk about the upward spiral idea is shortly after Netflix, who was the people that really popularized the unlimited vacation thing, shortly after that worked well, they started looking for other ways people weren't feeling trusted, and they turned their attention to the expense account. And they shortened the entire expense procedure to 5 words: act in Netflix's best interest. Right? I can shorten that even more. We trust you. Right? That's all it was. We'll trust you to act like an adult. Now, the 1 out of 100 people that just no matter what are sociopaths, and when we trust them, they're going to just take our money and disappear. Right. We invite them to be a sociopath in a different organization, right? But the other 99, there's no reason not to treat them like an adult because one person is taking advantage of that. The other 99 are going to benefit from being trusted and then trust you back.
Yeah, I love that. So you were talking about relationships earlier, and this has been on my mind a lot lately as I really look at how we can take our culture to the next level. Mm-hmm. And I love I think of it maybe in slightly different terms, which is trust being that you have to maintain it, let's say. Mm-hmm. So it's not given, it's not earned. I've never thought of it like that, and that's very powerful. So thank you for that. But you have to maintain it, right? And that you're in sort of this controlled free fall, and right. You're always putting yourself out there and leaving yourself vulnerable. And when you started talking about relationships, it made me think of that as well, which one of the most beautiful things to me that a human being can do, whether it's in a romantic relationship or whether it's here, right, is to say, I know some percentage of you, I'm going to put myself out there, I'm going to be vulnerable, and I'm going to get slapped for it, right? And that's really going to suck. But if I can do it full well, knowing that there is some percentage that's going to come back to me in a super negative and really bum me out kind of way, but keep doing it, like that's beautiful. That's so cool to me. And if you can do that, if you can, and I really believe, much like oxytocin, you're playing a game of brain chemistry at all times. And you can tell yourself something, right? That people are good or people are bad. Like Einstein, you brought up Einstein earlier. Right. Einstein is, he said, there's the most important question any person has to answer for themselves is whether the universe is working for you or against you. And I think that applies to people as well, right? And it's just a decision. It doesn't change the fundamental building blocks of the world, right? You've just decided the universe works for you. You've decided that people are good. And if you can go out there and say, hey, look, I know I'm going to get bitten in the ass, as my mother would say. I know I'm going to get bitten in the ass for this, but like it's still worth it because I believe that connection that I'll make with the other people is so useful and so... It feels rad, man. Right. Like it feels so rad and it's so good. And I think that then we can get in that, what I'm thinking of as a controlled free fall together of trust, that just amazing things will happen.
Yeah, well, and over time, as you get vulnerable, that person recognizes it. And then, do you have kids or no?
Do you count Pomeranians?
So when you have...
I'll take that as a no.
So when you have kids... Suddenly, it's not even just about us trusting each other. Now there's this third element that both of our best interests are sacrificed to that, right? So my wife and I have 2 boys, and not both of us almost all of our decisions are guided by that idea of acting in their best interests, right? But you only get to that place when each party is comfortable realizing they're acting in the best interest of the other person. And I think you want the same thing from a leadership and followership relationship, right? Is you want, as a follower, the only thing you want is to know that the leader is acting in your best interest, right? And as a leader, what you want to know is that the followers are acting usually in the best interest of the organization, right? Not just in the best interest of the leader, then we get into like a tyrant, and that's a terrible thing. But the idea that we're no longer just looking out for ourselves. And this is the problem with, this changing nature of work requires this. Back in the day when it was just running a factory and all we had to do is you had to show up for 8 hours and do this repetitive task, we didn't need you to do that. But now we're trusting you with coming up with ideas, solving problems. That requires a faith that this person will be acting in our best interests. Right?
And do you think people have to talk about that? Like, so let's say we get together in our team, we're based around a project. Is that one of the things we talk about, like day one?
I mean, it goes back to kind of the institutional thing. As soon as we like formalize it, it's going to get cheesy. But I do think we all need to get better at recognizing when people are being vulnerable. I think we also need to get better at being vulnerable and actually sharing, hey, I actually am clueless here, right? Like what is organizationally what we're supposed to do is then you're never supposed to let them see you sweat, right? You actually have to be open and honest about the fact that if you're out of your league, I'm out of my league and I could use help.
Yeah. I'm going to push you a little bit on the formalizing thing because I need to learn.
Right.
So I know I'm going to walk away from this conversation going, yeah, like I don't want it to be cheesy. And then we're going to get out in the real world and it's just never going to happen. Because as you scale, right, when it's small and what I call a cult of personality, it was very easy. I shared a room with everybody. They could see how I reacted to situations. I literally worked the production line. So I was making protein bars all day. And I would take the hardest job so everybody knew, like here's a guy who's willing to lead by example. If the toilet were overflowing, I was the one that would go clean it up. Because I always wanted to be able to say, I'll never ask you to do something I'm not willing to do myself, ever. So I wanted to set that standard first. And so people really got it. Like you bonded with people and they knew who you were and they like felt good about their relationship with you.
You were smart enough to know that when you were the center and everyone was working around you, people were taking their cues off of you. What's happening now as you're scaling is people are taking their cues off each other, which makes it even more important that the right people are in the room. So my questions would be, what are you doing in the interview process, in the selection process, to actually see that we're hiring people not just for competence, but also because they represent our culture? So in terms of shaping culture, I have bad news for you. If you're kind of in that peon role, you can shape the culture around the people sitting around you, but you're not going to be able to shape it on a large scale level. If you're in that management or leadership role, then you've got to actually ask that. Like every organization I've ever visited or worked with or spoken at has a list of core values, and when you ask how are these incorporated into who you're letting in the organization, there almost never are. Right? It's kind of the same thing with like mission statements. Like we spend all of this money and time to script one and then no one can remember it. Right? So what are you doing to make sure that your culture actually is what's there, and then what are you doing to reinforce that? In terms of policies and procedures, I think a lot of times one of our challenges is most of us are faced with what can we eliminate, right? Think about like vacation policy. That's actually a policy of elimination, of subtraction, of this is a thing that's getting in the way and not making people feel as, and I mean, the intent of your system originally was to make people feel rewarded for loyalty, right? The longer they are, the more vacation days they're there, et cetera. Sure. The challenge is the trade-off there is if it's actually making people feel like we're nickel and diming their days off, even though we're not tracking their days on, then there's a trust problem and we actually need to eliminate it. So that's kind of the bigger question. Or what are the things we need to eliminate, or if we're not in a position to change the entire organization, what are the things that I can just act as a human shield to shield my people from, if I can't eliminate them, that are actually making them feel less valued, less effective, or like they have less say over their job?
And maybe that's the right answer. I mean, at the end of the day, if, look, I don't want to make demands of every other company in the world, but if to me, like, we live in the most unique time I can think of, and I'm sure there have been others in history where there was so much tumultuous change that it was a real opportunity for just something groundbreaking and new. And I actually believe a lot of this is driven by social media, and I still don't think people understand what social media has done to change things. It's that instant level of communication. It's growing up with an expectation, not a lack of privacy. I don't think that's how it reads.
Right.
An expectation of sharing, and that you can connect, and that there is, while maybe it's not the most meaningful relationship in your life. Like, I've never met Kai, the guy that introduced us, but I actually feel, Kai, I feel connected to you. Like, I feel like I know him, right? So, and it's actually brought change into my life. He introduced me to a book and to an author that gave me an idea, and then we've implemented that idea and we've talked about it. So having this world be totally changed by social media, I think that it is good and useful to empower the employees to think about what should we or shouldn't we be doing. And you have talked about mutiny. Whether you want them to or not, like, mutinies will arise. Like, if you go far enough afield, like, people will eventually say, hey, this is a problem, and they will make change.
Well, but mutinies will eventually arise if people feel like you're not acting in their best interest. We bring it all the way back to that piece, right? But as long as there's a culture that knows that we're all, the organizational goals, interests are aligned with our own interests, and we're all going to be okay, then you won't ever have that mutiny. There's always sort of to bring it back to that idea of what's good for the kind of collective. Yeah. The thing that I think social media did is expanded the definition of who's in the collective. Like, we used to just think the people who are our full-time W-2 employees are our family. No, I mean, Kai's part of the Quest family, right?
Yeah.
Anyone that's ever posted on Instagram a picture of a product, or them at the gym and mentioned thanks for the protein, which is the weirdest slogan ever and a terrible one, and that's why I'm a management professor, not a marketing one. But they're a part of the tribe. They're a part of the broader collective. Right. And what we're able to do, I mean, if you think about, like, this is getting super nerdy, but if you think about Dunbar's number and the idea that as tribes we could know about 150 people intimately, like, what social media does is, I think it's a mind fake that you can know way more people than that intimately. Truthfully, I don't think you can, but you can feel that way, like you do with a lot of the people that are real loyal followers or real loyal consumers. You feel like you know them because we have this technology that lets us feel that way. So we have to ask, like, whether or not this scales to ad infinitum or not, we have to kind of ask, like, okay, now the definition of our tribe is much bigger. What are we doing to make sure there's that cultural reinforcement piece? One time when I was in college, I asked somebody, he behaved in this just really not self-interested way, really gave of himself and tirelessly to help this other struggling kid on our floor in the dorm. And I was like, why'd you ask that? Why'd you do all of that? And he said, and I wish I could remember his last name, but for lack of anything, we'll just call him Thompson, right? And he was like, well, I'm a Thompson, and that's what we do. Right? In other words, like, he had spent his whole life, he'd been raised like, in our tribe, this is how we act. And so I think the same thing with Quest. We have to ask, what are those core things that this shapes how we act? And when people say that they're a part of this community, whether they're a W-2 employee or not, when they feel like they're part of this community, what are the things they know, this is what it means to be that, this is how we act, etc. That's going to go a whole lot longer than just the policies and procedure manual.
Yeah, I agree. That's wonderfully human. I love that. And to me, advice, especially business advice that's in line with what what it feels like to be a human, like, that's always the real advice.
Admittedly, this is the thing we forget in business school a lot. Like, we teach spreadsheets and formulas and all sorts of stuff, and we forget that every organization is a group of humans trying to do something. And as long as you have that, you're gonna have human issues and you're gonna have human solutions.
Yeah, very true. And you're going to have all of the weirdness of insecurity is a great one, right? So when people think about econs, or when they think about boiling things down to advice that you can hand off and make a policy, which I know how much you love, they forget, like, that there's always going to be, like, some weird interplay that could have to do with just how that person's day has gone, or feeling slighted. And as a team, not even just as a leader, but as a team, like, recognizing the humanity of any situation, right? And asking, like, what's that that unseen thing that could be happening below the surface, and how might that be impacting the way that people are thinking and acting right now. And it goes back to what I was saying about one of the most beautiful things I think a human being can do, certainly in the context of a business, is say, I'm going to make myself vulnerable, knowing that some percentage of that will come back to me negatively, and I'm going to do it anyway. And when I take that hit, and it hurts, and it sucks, and it doesn't feel good, then I'm going to keep doing it, because I know that on balance, it actually works out better in the long run to really invest in people.
Right.
And that concept, like, here's something I've been thinking about lately is, and it goes along with what you were saying about trust, like investing in people, and thinking about, once you stop making a layoff your first go-to reaction to anything, underperformance, downsizing, anything.
That's the spreadsheet solution.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So having that investment, like I am, and I don't know a way around just sort of talking openly about it, but I'm going to invest in you, dear person looking back at me, and I'm hopeful that you will invest in me, and that means XYZ, that you don't have to worry that my first thought will be to get rid of you, but instead that if we collide for whatever reason, I'm going to ask the question of humanity, like what might be going on that would have led to that.
Yeah, no, and you can get huge gains from that. I mean, Simon Sinek talks about in Leaders Eat Last, to a people who always know that leadership has their back, that they have their interests at heart, right? Even bad news can be tolerated more when you have that.
Yes, yes. What's your definition of a life well lived?
So I was on Jonathan Field's podcast, Good Life Project, and he asked, his question is, what's a good life? And I gave the weirdest answer about like planets and the sun or whatever, and it was awful.
I'm intrigued.
And I still haven't, I say that because what I'm about to say, I have never figured out how to take into a soundbite, right? But I think that it's one in which you have in essence, your planets aligned in orbit properly. You know what your priorities are. As soon as you've figured out what that is, and you're giving your time towards that priorities in sync and in line with what they actually are, you have a life well lived. For some people, that looks very different than from other people. What matters is you've got your planets aligned.
That's a great answer. David, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. That was really incredible. I enjoyed that a lot. Guys, you're going to want to dig into this, man. It was a really fun journey. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu thing is just the beginning of a whole lot of really, really interesting stuff. So where can they find you online?
So probably the best place is just davidburkus.com. From there, whatever you want to connect with on Twitter, Insta, Face, Snapgram, whatever.
Snapgram?
Right. Wherever you want to connect, we're there. We're there. So davidburkus.com is probably the best place.
Guys, I would definitely do that. What you saw today, all the stuff he talks about with the human side of things permeates everything he does, especially his books, which are absolutely incredible. And if you let them, they will shake you up. No matter what role you play in a business, whether you own it, whether it's your first day, it doesn't matter. All of the advice will make sense because it's so human, and it will be in line with exactly what you feel. It'll be the things that you've been feeling, but you did not have the words to put around it. Or if you're like me, it will literally slap you awake, and you will realize all the mistakes that you have unintentionally been making. And it's incredible. It is a journey you will enjoy, I promise you very much. All right, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. This is a weekly show. Our goal in life is to deliver value, so hopefully we're doing that. And if we are, please share this content. As you guys know, we're trying to grow the audience as big as we can. Our only desire is to help people. That's it. We don't try to monetize it, nothing. Until next week, my friends, be legendary. Take care.